The DIESOL podcast.
Digital integration in English as a second or other language.
Episode 9, Grammar.
Welcome to DIESOL episode 9. We are your hosts. I am Brent Warner.
And I'm Ixchell Reyes.
Hey, Ixchell, how's it going?
Hey, happy February.
Yeah, we had a good time with Carol last time, and lots of good response. So I know we've got some new listeners and everything. So
awesome.
We did talk about doing a little bit of show format reshuffling, and so we're going to get right into our topic, and we'll talk about business and other things later on as we move forward. So today's topic was suggested by David Terrio on Twitter at DavidTEDU, and the topic is grammar. So we can't really be an ESL show without talking about grammar. I don't know. Maybe we can, I guess.
Our necessary evil.
Yeah, what we'll talk about today is can we or can't we, I guess. But there's so much to talk about, and it's really hard to know where to start. So if we just say, well, let's just talk about grammar, it's like, well, there are thousands and thousands of books just about that. But we thought we'd do a broad overview. And then if we want to, maybe in the future, we can get into specifics on maybe particular grammar points and ideas on how to kind of work with those in technology. But today, let's keep it a little bit broad.
Yeah, so we know that grammar can be difficult, especially because students' native language grammar can get in the way. Grammar can be dry and boring. Oftentimes, it's canned and unauthentic. You have lots of drills, which limits student interaction. And then that also in turn limits negotiation of language. Then you have the memorization of formulas, actually instill in a student that there's only one way to write something. And we know that that's not the case. And we know that students need to be offered plenty of opportunities to look at different grammar examples in different contexts so that they can play with the grammar and see that, look, here, this is where speakers broke the grammar rule, and that's perfectly okay.
In fact, it happens all the time.
It happens all the time.
Yeah. It's a little bit tricky because, as we know, we say, well, in this case, it's this. And then a student always is just great at coming up with a perfect example of how you can't do what they asked you to. And what like,
but why?
Right. Why
but
this?
Why?
This? Right. Exactly. So we found a lot of information on one pretty massive article by Diane Larson Freeman. And so, Ixchell, I think that we deserve a PhD for just the work that we put into trying to break this down.
That hurt our brains.
Yeah. So basically, there's an article. It's called "Thinking Aloud," and that's ALLOWED: Research into Practice, Grammar Learning, and Teaching. And it goes into how we apply the research into our actual teaching and how we do and how we don't. And so we did our best to break this down. It's a great read, and it's really, really interesting, but there's quite a lot going into it. So we're going to do our best to kind of simplify that and share it out, right? And
right.
Ixchell, help me out if I'm being unclear at any point here. Okay. So first, we got to get into this idea that there's an idea that even though teachers have been versed in research approaches to grammar, they often still fall back on teaching in a way that they see as more effective rather than the way that the research shows, right?
Right. Of course.
I think we've all done that, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, it says that, but I've done this all the time, and I'm going to keep doing what I do.
Yeah, and if we see results or what we perceive as results, why not?
Right. And so because of this, research itself, like we're just talking about the overall idea of research, it may or may not affect teaching in a lot of different ways.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it's like, okay, it's cool, it's out there, and what we're trying to do on this show is to help people see what research is out there to help them inform. But that means, according to this, she's basically saying it doesn't always make a difference, right? Even if people know what theoretically is the best idea. But she goes into a few different areas, and she says how much impact these different areas have. So little impact, modest impact, and then potentially large impact in the future. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of the information on the little impact, which is kind of this one is the tricky one because we all learn it right away in grad school as teachers, and it's the comprehensible input over teaching grammar, right? Crashin', good old Crashin'. And Crashin's idea that we should be immersed in the language and that we don't need to teach anything explicitly. It's kind of how children learn. Like when you talk to children, they don't know what prepositions are, but they can use them perfectly, right? And so the idea is that we don't need to be teaching explicitly all the time, and that students, but the problem here is that they have done some studies with people using a methodology like this in like French Canadian schools, and they said that even years after immersion, there are still students that are making basic grammatical errors because they're never actually explicitly taught how to do some of the ideas, right? Yeah, so it becomes tricky because we all have this thing that we're taught, and but at the same time, when you go into language classes, progressive teachers, as progressive as they may be, we're still seeing a lot of explicit language teaching at one level or another. And so the research that's out there that says, hey, don't do this, is not really impacting the actual pedagogy. So that's a little bit tricky, but basically I think we all kind of understand that, and I've had lots of conversations with my colleagues around that too. It's like, well, how much do I do explicit versus implicit and all of these things? And there is research, a lot of different approaches that sometimes get used. And so we're going to be looking at four different points that Diane Larson Freeman kind of shares with us. Okay, so we spent a long time trying to get this done. We're going to hope that we're clear. This may be one of our headiest conversations yet, and we'll try to kind of keep it a little simpler in the future, but I think that this is important information.
Right.
Okay. So let's start with explicit. This is what the research says. Hey, there is some research out there that's being applied in classrooms, and we are seeing some effects going on with these things, right? So the explicit rules, which is the top-down rules, is the idea that, we are just going to teach you exactly what the rule is, and you are going to look at that rule, and you're going to understand it, and then you're going to be able to apply it, right? Maybe even connected to things like the grammar translation method, etc. We kind of teach against this, or we teach teachers, don't do this type of stuff. But the problem is we have students from so many countries that are used to this learning style, right?
Right. And I've had so many times students come from another class and they'll tell me, teacher, why did you take such a long time to explain it? Why don't you just give me the rule? And it's like, but I want you to process this.
Yeah. So that's the real problem. Right? Just like you're saying, we might not think it's the best practices, but many learners actually just want this. It's just like, just give it to me, just tell me what to do, and I'm going to do that thing. Right. And then the irony is that we kind of say this, oh, well, this is not the best practice. But then as learners, when we switch into learner mode, I have so many teachers, like when I do trainings or, whatever it is, they're just like, I don't want to go through it. You just tell me what to do and I'll do it later. I was like, okay, well, that's the same idea, right? Now, there is research that actually shows that this kind of explicit top-down teaching can be effective.
So the next approach is implicit teaching versus explicit teaching of rules. An example of this might be which one doesn't belong. For if you were teaching parallel structure, say, and you're asking students to take a look at several sample sentences or several word forms and seeing discriminating which one does not belong. And then they might say like, oh, this one's a noun, this one's a noun, this one's a noun, this one's an adjective. Okay. And then deductive, which would be direct teaching of that concept, where you would tell a student, okay, if you have a noun, it must be followed by another noun and then another noun in a series to form parallel structure. So what Diane says is that sometimes it's fine to teach students explicitly, but other times it may be better to allow students more discovery time. And Brent, I don't know if you've noticed that and you have so many learning styles or combination of learning styles. And so this allowing students to have a chance to explore through their own learning, through the way they feel more comfortable is a good thing to do in the classroom.
Right, right. So in these ones in particular, it can be, sometimes we really want them to explore and to figure everything out. And then sometimes we just don't have the time for all of that, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so that can be a real problem, actually making time in the class for it.
And so I know for myself, there are many times when I think, man, if only I had 5 more minutes or 20 more minutes and they would grasp this concept. But then again, there will be my students who'll grasp it just from the rule. And for the sake of time, I have to continue moving on.
So next up, she talked about input-based instruction, which is the idea that you practice the form first and then you connect it to the meaning. So for example, students might notice words that stand out more, like adverbs of time, to generalize a concept. So they say, okay, tomorrow helps me recognize that I'm talking about the future, and yesterday helps me recognize that I'm talking about the past.
Or signal words.
Right, some signal words or something like that. But then they never really ended up focusing on things like the actual verb form that helps them, and might not, those signal words might not be there, but to a native English speaker, the verb form and the verb tenses are going to be the clues that help us understand when you're talking about, right? So one of the examples that in the pre-show you and I discussed was when we're using the present progressive ing, right? I am plus ing, we would have students practice that in many different forms, and just so that they could get the form down first, right? I am going, I am eating, I am dancing, whatever that is, right? But then we would want to say, hey, hold on a second. Now you've got that form, but let's connect that to showing an understanding of the future, right? So I am going to San Francisco. Okay, well, right now you are here in, Southern California. And so you are not currently moving to go to San Francisco. You're not currently in motion. And so therefore we can understand that as a future idea, right?
Right.
I am eating at the steakhouse. Well, right now you're in class, so you can't be doing that. So I understand that to be a future idea, etc. So after they get that form down, then the ideas link it over to the actual meaning.
Finally, Diane talks about focus tasks. These are tasks such as asking students to give directions from a map, ordering from a menu, making an appointment. And so tasks that are needed to fulfill pre-designated language goals. So prepositions of direction, questions, requests. And these are especially true, are activities that we tend to use with emergent leaders. Diane adds that in addition to these tasks that are necessary for these goals, the designing of activities where the students are naturally repeating the target structure is really important in order to curb the tendency to overuse drills. So I don't know about you, Brent, but I oftentimes try to have dialogues where the students might create their own dialogues, and then we go in there and add where else they can use a target structure.
Yeah. That makes sense. So this one's real specific, right? Like you have to get this actual goal done with this specific language, and maybe, maybe it's a pattern, a language pattern or whatever it is, but it's like, once you learn this pattern, then you'll have it locked down. It's your little treasure chest that you can open up, and you can use it every time in this situation, right?
Right.
So I do like those, and I find that students like them pretty well too, because they're clear and they have a designated purpose for them, right?
And you and I both studied other languages, and I know that the things I learned that I still remember, because I don't actively practice, but what I do remember and I've retained is the ability to make an appointment, the ability to cancel, the ability to order something. And that's because there were a lot of those were activities where there was natural repetition, not just the memorization, but a natural repetition of something, an interactional activity.
Right. So she kind of wraps this all up with an interesting conclusion, which is that it might be better to see what successful teachers do and then break that down for reflection rather than trying to watch what teachers do and apply it to some form of pedagogy, right? Or sorry, some research, not pedagogy, some research that's out there, right? So the idea is, we're trying to fit everything into a mold, and her thought is, well, there are teachers that are really successful and not everybody's actually using these practices. So let's, instead of making these ideas up kind of ivory tower style, let's actually go spend more time watching what teachers are doing and then use that. The problem with using the research around grammar is, as she points out, number one, there's not a lot of consensus in the research. For every article that Krashen puts out, there's 20 people that argue against it, right? Next is that grammar really does invest teachers with transmittable knowledge, right? Here is the thing that I can give to you. The students go, ooh, I've got this thing, right? And now I can happily walk away from class feeling that I've learned something that's kind of tangible, right? And the students want that kind of security. They want to be able to be told, this is what you do, and this is how I do it, and then they can do that and repeat it, right? That feels satisfying in your learning journey. There's also problems with the fact that every teacher is different. They've got their own techniques and their own styles. And also every student is different, their own motivation. Some of them are motivated, some of them are not, right? We've all had the experience where we taught a lesson for one class and, the kids were hoisting you up on their shoulders, telling you how great you are. And then the next class, they're like throwing rotten tomatoes at you. And it's like, what did I do differently? Right. And so you might have different student bases, all these different things. And then I really loved this quote in there at the end. It said, teachers cannot afford to be purists. We got to get through the day. We have to move forward. I don't know. I mean, sometimes it's just like, all right, like, I can't explain every single point of this to you, every version of it, we got to get going. We've got so many things to learn. And so, unfortunately, it doesn't always work out to be a total purist. But anyways, Ixchell, I think you and I deserve like I said, some sort of reward for going through this. Hopefully that was fairly clear enough. I'll point out at the end of the article, she goes on to her bigger point, which is what is the actual potential future, which is reconceiving grammar. And we don't have time to explain that. It's worth reading. This article is out there for free on the Cambridge site. And so we have a link in the show notes. If you want to go get your PhD. The other issue is that
dissertation topic.
Yeah, this idea of reconceiving grammar. I mean, it's so underdeveloped right now, and she points this out that it needs so much more research and kind of understanding how all these different ideas. So I think we're going to leave it here. That's plenty of talk around the research of how grammar is applied in the classroom.
Right. Thank you. All right, so it is time to reveal the iTunes review that we got. Thank you, by the way, for all of you new listeners out there. We do appreciate the time.
Reviews now.
Yeah,
I think that was Carol's words. I think she's just
Carol.
She convinced people to leave some reviews.
Yeah, so thank you, Carol. Thank you, all of our listeners, new listeners, old listeners. But we have chosen a review by Run Walker 1. So Run Walker 1, wherever you are, whoever you are, please get in touch with us so that we can give you a pin. And Rune Walker 1 writes, great show for teachers of ELs. These guys are putting out great content. We can't get enough content for English learners, especially when it comes to the best ways to integrate technology. I am subscribing so I can get more ideas that we can use right away. Keep it up, Brent and Ixchell. And she gave us 5 stars. So thank you very much.
Yeah, that's super cool. It makes us both really happy to see reviews. So we're grateful for that. Thank you, Run Walker. Okay, so Ixchell, we've talked about the research.
Wait, stop. Hold on. My brain is hurting.
No, let's do the fun stuff. Now we get to go into the actual tools and techniques.
Awesome.
Different things we're doing for grammar in the actual classroom.
Yes, we can talk about this all day long.
All right. Now it's easy. Now we can, well, there's still more, but at least you know that feeling when your brain's working and you hear it squishing inside, right? I'm going to find out if my brain fell out of my ears earlier. All right. Okay, so I'll start with the obvious. Google Docs.
Woohoo. Favorite. One of my favorites. Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I think I'm going to just link these two together right now, Google Docs and Newsela. Have I talked to you about Newsela, or have we talked about that on the show yet?
I don't know if we've talked about it on this show.
But maybe.
I'm familiar with it, but go ahead and for our listeners.
Regardless, Newsela is a tiered reading platform. So when students log in, they can read any news article at 5 different levels. So it gets increasingly more complex, and the top level is usually a real news article from things like AP, Washington Post, etc. But regardless, when you're using Google Docs or when you're using Newsela, one of my favorite tools in both of those is the highlighting and the commenting features, because these are interactive resources. And so what I often have students do is if we're working on a grammar point, so let's say we pull something out of a source or whatever it is, and we say, hey, here we're looking at subject-verb agreements, then I want my students to be able to show me that they understand subject-verb agreements in authentic texts, so then they could quickly and easily they can highlight a verb, right? And then they can click on plus in Newsela, or they can or on Google Docs, and on the side margin notes, they can tell me, is it a singular verb? Is it a plural verb? What noun, what subject does it connect to? What is the form of that? And they can highlight those in different colors. And so that's kind of a way for them to process the language that ties into, the research above that's showing, that there are some tools here for students to have the ability to notice, recognize, and then show their understanding of the grammar points. So I use this pretty commonly both with Google Docs and Newsela, just really basic highlighting and showing me what works, but you could do this. The really great thing is that even if you're not exclusively teaching ELs, like if you have a mixed classroom in high school, for example, and I was talking to a high school teacher recently about an idea like this, and said, oh, well, I could just add that on for my ELs, right? I don't have to make this an exclusive assignment. I could just say, hey, as you're learning, show me these quick couple points and give me 3 or 4 examples in addition to the regular work that they're doing. So this can be really powerful for students to be able to figure out some of the tools and ideas around showing a recognition and growth of their grammar.
Okay, so I want to share one of my favorite podcasts, and this is Grammar Girl.
Oh yeah.
I know, and you've got personal connection, sort of, kind of by association, right?
Yeah, she was on my sister's podcast,
Brent's sister has a podcast.
What a surprise! I guess I should clarify that. So my sister is a publisher and writer, and she does a podcast around those types of things. So she had Grammar Girl on, which was pretty cool.
So Grammar Girl is Mignon Fogarty. Hopefully I said her name right. But she does little known facts about grammar or interesting questions that come up around grammar. For example, one that comes up in my classes is always, why, I've been taught British English spelling all my life, and I came here now, and now I have to learn all these new words or new spellings. And so that comes up. Oh, and of course I can give an explanation, but I like to start my grammar classes by having them listen to the podcast. And then I have some questions, and then they have students talk about what, grammar does have rules, but there are ways that they can be broken. And grammar also reflects a lot of our culture. And so, language and culture are tied together. Excuse me. And I like to have that conversation to help students maybe be more open especially for the ones that are very much, they want just a rule. And then there's the God forbid there's an exception, and now the whole world is falling apart. But again, like we said, students want security, so that helps a little bit to help them to understand that a living language changes, and so the same we see the same phenomenon in their own language. And other kind of interesting topics for your more advanced students, or for students that where you want to teach the beauties of grammar. Portmanteaus, for example, a combination of two words. She's got a great episode on that. Mondegreen, spoonerisms, and oxymorons. I'm not sure if you are familiar with those two terms, but
that was three,
but oxymoron.
Oh yeah, I am familiar with
brain is hurting. Is hurting.
We're still in recovery mode. Okay.
And so those kind of beauties of grammar are what I like to start off. So Grammar Girl podcast, you can do a lot with. She gives a lot of examples as well.
Yeah. And her book is, it's been around for a while, like 10 years.
She's got several. Several.
I remember when I first started teaching, or actually when I first moved back to the States and I started teaching in schools in the States, I grabbed her book, and like my students loved those little ideas out of there. So
I ended up buying several, and when I moved out of California, I gave out my collection. And one of the ones that's the best is, I think it's quick and dirty tips for student writers or something like that, or something like that. But it's awesome. It's written for students. It's funny. It's she's witty, sarcastic at times, but Grammar Girl podcast.
Okay, so the next one for me is the Google or actually even just your text message. This is just a kind of a hint for students to play around with if they're really into it, is predictive text. Because the predictive text, once you start putting in a couple of words or a couple of, a name or one or two words in the beginning of a sentence, then it guesses at what you're going to be end up saying, right? Have you ever done that little game, Ixchell, where you just push the center button until it creates a sentence and you see what that weird sentence ends up being?
No, I haven't.
Oh, so sometimes people do this. Like it shows up on Twitter. It's like, what does your predictive text sentence make, right? And you put in a weird first word, and then it just kind of, you push the center button and it'll say, the platypus is what you write. And then it says, can be delivered until yesterday. And it's like, wait a second, what's going on? You know what I mean? So it's just like trying to figure out what your next word might be. And so, having students kind of play around with this just to see what kind of weird sentences might show up, but then they're going to have to spend the time, because they might be a semi-nonsense sentence, but the students can kind of play around with it. And it's like, well, in theory, it has a meaning, right? Because it's pulling from tons of AI data and putting all of these together to create a semi-sentence. And so I wouldn't totally recommend it just like as a classroom activity, but I would say like, to have a little bit of fun with your students, or maybe a little break time, or a recommendation to play around with on the weekend. They can see what's going on with predictive text and try and make guesses about why is the phone putting this as my next form in here as well, right? So I thought that's kind of like an interesting way to play with grammar. And then you could actually have students write down their sentences and then break down what their sentences mean and show, what kind of weird things are happening with there. So predictive text, you can either do it inside of like, the Google search bar. You can have it show up with some ideas in there, or just right on your phone. It can make up some sentences for you there.
Cool. That's a cool activity. I think I'm going to use that. I'm going to steal it. Yeah. My next item that I want to share, tool, is Grammar Pop. This is also by Grammar Girl. It's an app. I like to project it on the screen because it can get a little challenging, but the concept is you've got floating words and you're moving through levels. So the higher the level, the harder the grammar concept is. So you're looking at words and you're maybe she'll ask you to pop only the prepositions. So you pop all the prepositions, or little bubbles are moving through the screen. And you earn bonuses. The less mistakes you make, there's also a time concept, but then it'll go into word forms, and now you'll have like adjectives, but now you might have nouns that can be adjectives. So that's where students tend to make mistakes, and then they're like, but that's a noun. And then we have to talk, we pause and we talk about, but remember, sometimes that can also be an adjective. And so grammar pop is kind of a cool way to get them thinking about the differences in word functions. So I don't believe that it's a free app, but I think it's only available for iPad. I know, but I purchased it and I like to use it.
And, so on the iPad, that means you put it up on the projector?
I connect my iPad to the projector.
Oh, cool.
I don't know. That might be a challenge. That might, yeah. If you're up to doing that, Grammar Pop is great. So
That's
Grammar,
cool.
if you're out there, please make a web tool so that we can just use our computer.
Yeah, we'll put that in the tweet request
wish list.
Okay. So my next one is the good old fashioned corpus. Ixchell, are you a user of the corpus?
Yeah, the Coca.
Yeah, sure.
The Coca?
Any different corpus.
Any corpus, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the Coca is a great one.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things. I am not as great as I could be about using it. We had a colleague here, Mark Macchino. He was awesome about using it with his students and really kind of getting them into it. And he moved away, but I really kind of want to be better about using the corpus because, again, more authentic uses, and students can just choose individual words and like preposition plus whatever, and then they can see like what words go together. So there's a lot of really good use of the corpus that I am under skilled in, but it's something that I have plans for becoming better at, and hopefully having that again as an open resource for students to understand that they can go in, they can go do their work and figure out more ideas and a deeper understanding of language through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wish I had more time to spend on corpus, but
we all do. Yeah. We all want more time for the corpus.
Okay, so my next tool is also kind of an oldie. It's just a regular QR code, and what I like to do with QR codes for grammar is when I'm teaching, for example, signal words for or adverbs of cause and effect, and versus adverbs of time versus adverbs of whatever it is you're teaching. One of our books or books will usually have this story of like put these items in sequence and then use the connectives to show the relationship between ideas. So that gets to be boring. And of course, some teachers like to cut up the activity or cut up sentences and then have the students piece them together. But what I find my students really love is if I take each, let's say it's a timeline of events that happened, and I take each event and then I embed that on a QR code. Then I print that QR code and post it randomly in the classroom. And so their job is to go out there with in pairs or groups, because I like to do this as a group activity, and they need to I tell them they need to gather evidence for whatever story I've given them. I like to use crime stories, and they're the detectives. They're out there to go find out and piece together the information in the order that it happened. And they now have to use adverbs to connect it. And in the end, there's several possibilities that with different outcomes if they put them in the wrong place. So that's one where they find it like it's a game. And then they also, I find that they actually interact more. And I don't tell them you can't talk to other groups because but they sort of like keep their information secret. But then when they get stuck, they sort of want to go around and talk to each other. And that's when you really see them like talk about, well, what's the relationship between this and this? Now that means it's a cause and the effect, but maybe it means it happened at the same time. So I like to do that with QR codes only because it creates a element of mystery, and students like to uncover things or discover things themselves. So
that's very cool. Do you happen to have a pre-made lesson of that with a folder that you can share out with people?
I actually do. Actually, I do. Of course I do.
Let's put that in the show
notes.
I think.
All right, awesome.
Yeah, because that way people can access it, and they're like, they don't know how to make it, but if they have yours, they can start with that and take a look at it.
Yeah,
right?
and there's just I know that there's plenty of other ways that you can use QR codes for grammar, like grammar hunts. There's a lot of grammar hunts you can do out there. So that's just a simple one.
Done.
But yeah, I'll throw it in the folder. Awesome.
Okay, cool. I've got a couple quick more ones. One, I was just saw this kind of while I was randomly putting ideas into Google and thinking about, what ideas we could talk about. And a student or just a language learner themselves kind of said this interesting thing that what they're doing is they're using Google Translate in reverse. And so they're an English language learner. And what they said they were doing is they're writing sentences that they think are basically correct in English. And then they're having it translate it back into, in his case, Spanish, right? And then he's saying, well, how does the Spanish sentence that it's writing make sense to me? And I thought, oh, that's a really interesting thing to do. I don't know how totally well it would work because, maybe the translation is not always perfect, or maybe the translation is getting so good that it can fix errors that are already there. I don't know, but I thought it was a really interesting idea because it just means that that person is exploring on their own and trying to use tools to help him double check his own ideas, right?
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I'm going to be sharing that with my students and letting them explore it a little bit more. And so then they can come back to me and say, oh yeah, no, it totally makes sense. And then they could show me the English sentence and I'll tell them later, yeah, that sentence is good. Or, oh no, this sentence is not good. What did it turn out to be in Farsi or in Chinese or whatever it is, right? And so I'm really interested in kind of just like seeing what happens there and showing that to some of my students.
That's awesome.
And then I've got one last one, Ixchell. I think we're going to wrap up here, but very quickly, Flipgrid grammar hunt. So
Flipgrid, I love Flipgrid.
Yeah, so kind of like in connection with your QR stuff, right? You can run out with the camera, you can go see what's going on, and I like the idea of not talking to the camera, like having it be the talking head thing, but pointing it at books and pointing it at articles and different things, and then using the camera to help talk through ideas, right? So people do this with like book snaps and different things like that, but all you have to do is just have a Flipgrid going, and if you haven't used Flipgrid, go take a look at it. It's free, and then you can have a Flipgrid run and give them the prompt and say, hey, go find a real example of this out in the real world. And then when the students are out at Carl's Jr. or whatever restaurant they're at or whatever it is, and they see written English, and then they can use that and point to it and then explain from behind the camera. So all we see is their hand in the text, but they can be explaining what grammar they're seeing there or how they're seeing examples of the grammar that we're talking about. So I think that's enough. We got a lot of different things in there people can work through. Let's jump over to our fun finds.
Okay, for our fun finds, today I am sharing a book called How to Talk to Your Cat About Gun Safety. This is for cat lovers and humor enthusiasts.
I'm one of those.
So it might be right up your alley, Brent. I do have to say it may be offensive to some people, so read at your own risk.
Fair warning. Okay. All right, so we're going to keep these ones short. Mine is Kit Kat Duos. I don't know if you've seen this in Japan. There are all these different seasonal Kit Kats, but in America, not usually, right? But recently they put out these mint and dark chocolate Kit Kats. And if you like mint chip ice cream like I do, that is definitely a win.
Sounds delicious.
All right, so Ixchell, we did have a couple of new bits of business. We dropped them from the beginning, so we'll share a couple things back here on the end. If you have to leave and can't listen to the show anymore, we would sadly say goodbye, but we got just a couple more minutes of things. So, number one, you can buy us a coffee, which is nice.
Guess who came up with that idea? Mr. Coffee Lover over here.
But so this is actually a kind of like a Patreon type of thing where you can, if you felt like, hey, this show is worth it, it's helpful to me on any particular episode or on a regular basis, you can just, in theory, buy us a cup of coffee. You can buy one for either one of us or for both of us. It'll all go to the same place. But you just right on the page on diesel.org, you can go click, and it's really, really nice because it's super easy. You can just say, hey, I want to use Apple Pay or whatever, and buy us a quick cup of coffee. So we would appreciate it.
Yes, thank you in advance. So we have episode 10 coming up, something exciting with our friend and colleague, Dr. Mary Patton. And if you'd like to get to know her a bit before the show, we really recommend checking her out on Twitter. Her handle is at Dr. M. Patton Esol. So Dr. M. Patton Esol, and that'll be in the show notes as well.
Yeah, I am. Actually, by the time this shows, we're right in between time. I'm doing actually 2 presentations, but by the time this episode launches, I will have just finished my Orange County Tesol presentation, and a couple days before that, I will have had done. Is that right, Grammar? In the future, looking back at the past, I will have finished. Also, the Mullet PD, which was the free professional development plus a couple of drinks in Costa Mesa.
Yeah, that deserves some coffee. And I will be getting ready for the Tesol annual convention in Colorado. So
awesome. Thank you so much for listening to the show. We made it through. It's going to be a longer one than normal, I think, Michelle. If you want to get one of the kind Diesel pins, you can drop us a message, a line on iTunes. And then, Michelle, we had talked about briefly, if you're kind of showing something somewhere else, if you're doing it in a different place, just send us a message and show it to us so that we know, because we might not be aware of everywhere that someone is talking about us or helping to spread the word.
Right. So you can find more on this episode and about our podcast at diesel.org.
And you can find us on Twitter. The show is at DieselPod. I am at Brent G. Warner.
And I am at Ixi_Pixie. That's IXY_PIXY.
In Tagalog, thank you is salamat. So, salamat for tuning into the Diesel podcast. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Goodbye.